Now that we're a few days into December, and perhaps the snow has already started flying where you live, or even where we live, a hot beverage has become even more welcome than it usually is. I say, or even where we live, because as we record this, no snow, but in a week or two, could be just covered in it. So cocoa, hot chocolate, tea, all those choices are fine, but they don't sponsor us, and Spark Plug Coffee does. So those other drinks can do us all a favor by pulling their lip up over their head and swallowing. Yeah, Spark Plug Coffee has the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans that can be found in Canada. And for those who don't know, most of our country probably gets better weather than Wabasha, Minnesota does. We do here in Toronto, at least. And speaking of towns in Minnesota, customers who live there, or in the other 47 continental states, will get their coffee orders sent to them within a week. That's true for Canadians, too, and we hosers will also get our orders shipped for free. Sparkplug offers many blends and roasts. They've also got all kinds of seasonal blends, and those can come in half-calf or decaf, if that's what you prefer to pour into your mug when you're trying to catch your limit over a frozen lake. I caught my limit. I can't do a Walter Matthau. Do a season 1, 2, 3 Homer Simpson, or even season 1, 2. That's a Walter Matthau. That's what Dan Castellaneta was going for. Now, maybe you don't want to be a member of a midwinter ice fishing club, but membership in Sparkplug's Autopilot Coffee Club will get you many perks and deals, and you won't freeze to death out there. Members also, listen closely, save money on every order. You can customize to get your orders when it suits you, so if you've suffered a heart attack and don't have the strength to stir your own Java for a while, pause or cancel that membership. Or get a bombshell lady to stir it for you. She doesn't appear to be busy. So yeah, this is not a Coffee of the Month club. Sparkplug.coffee/HYES is where you need to go to get shopping. You'll save 20% by using our HYES promo code. Great stocking stuffer. We're in that time of year. Now I think we need to start deconstructing this deep, thoughtful, layered motion picture, Bev. I might be a moron, but you don't need to be a putz. Please tell Andrew to start playing our theme song.
And action! Have you ever seen
Grumpy Old Men? How you doing there, movie monkeys, and thanks for devouring the 553rd expedition on this podcasting channel known as Have You Ever Seen? We scamper back into cinema's past and try to find movie classics that are worth reviewing. This one isn't a classic, but it does have some classic moments. Plus it's pretty sweet and fairly funny, I thought. We laughed a fair amount. Definitely some chuckles. We'll be spoiling the sweet and the funny, by the way. I'm the guy with crippling tax burdens who wonders where all the Midwestern accents are in this movie. Ryan Ellis. Wonder even more after watching 2 episodes of the new season of Fargo and hearing Juno Temple do it so well. These guys sound nothing like they're from the Midwest. And here's the lady about whom I've often said, holy moly, even when she smelled a fish that had been lying in a car for several days. My wife, Beth.
That's me.
Lucky for you, I wouldn't be able to smell that dead fish anyway, although maybe something as strong as that would be a scent I could smell.
You don't know, I've actually smelled like fish this whole time.
Okay, maybe I wouldn't smell it then. I always say I can't smell things. We know that. I don't smell good smells or farts, those kinds of things. But a skunk, or maybe a dead fish in your car for many days. Although, as the internet points out, that time of year, the fish would just be frozen. It would never smell anyway.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So it lays in his truck, and he wouldn't need to know because...
Yeah, he wouldn't notice it till May.
Okay, the coming attractions opinion question for Grumpy Old Men. The outtakes at the end of the movie are pretty famous. Mixed in with Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau blowing their lines is Burgess Meredith rattling off all kinds of off-color expressions for what their friend Chuck is about to do with Ann-Margret. Which would you say is his funniest one-liner?
I'm going to say, looks like Max is a tomcat on the prowl, which isn't the funniest, but it's followed by Burgess Meredith. Meow! Like the way he does it. Like I'll never do it justice.
The line is fine. That's my secondary choice. Meow is the best of all of this.
The look, the expression on his face.
As he's turning away as well. But my favorite line, just as a line, though, is, looks like Chuck's taking the skin boat to Tuna Town. That wasn't really a common thing back then for movies to have outtakes at the end. You see it so often since, and maybe it did then sometimes, I don't know, when the movie's not funny. And this is their way of saying, oh, look at our people being fun and screwing things up and look how much fun they're having. Well, this movie's fairly funny. It's not the funniest movie of all time, but it is fairly funny. And then you've got some of the best laughs at the very end.
Yeah.
Bit of a trendsetter. Okay, The Ex-Teacher, The Ex-TV Repairman, and The Current Artist was released by Warner Brothers just 3 weeks shy of 30 years ago on Christmas Day, 1993. Covered a lot of 93 movies lately. The film only ranked 6th at the box office its first couple of weekends, and that's a tough time of year, Christmas time. But it stuck around that winter and ended up more than doubling its budget, so not a bad return on investment. But Wife of Mine, since we're talking about a motion picture that first hit the streets when we were teenagers, we ought to remind everyone what it's about. So please give them the skinny on Grumpy Old Men.
Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau are John and Max, two long feuding neighbors whose rivalry accelerates when Ann-Margret's Ariel moves across the street, breathing a breath of fresh air into the neighborhood and triggering a competition for her affections. John gets the girl, but Max convinces him he doesn't deserve her because of an IRS debt that's about to sink him, driving her into Max's arms. But everything changes when John has a heart attack on Christmas. Max has a change of heart, saves John from the IRS, and convinces Ariel to give him another chance.
Gets a pity marriage out of it. Hold on, I'm going to address what you're about to say. I know what you're going to say, I think.
I have notes about this.
Or, in a nutshell, the only two women in the movie, both super babes, mind you, settle for romances with their neighbors.
Are they the only people she can date?
Ann-Margret or Darryl Hannah. Now, I guess Darryl Hannah's not really her neighbor because Jacob's father lives there, but they both used to live in those houses, so that's why I said
they grew up across
neighbors.
The neighbors from each other. That's how they know each other. They both still live in this small town. The worst thing about this movie is how underwritten Ariel is. Everything about her is concocted just to make her more appealing. She's a free thinker. She's so crazy. She rolls around in the snow in her bathing suit. She rides her snowmobile in the middle of the night. So crazy.
In the middle of the street, too.
In the middle of the street. And then once he's alone with her, there's nothing crazy about her. She's soft-spoken. She's patient. She's sweet. She's emotionally mature. So why is the most desirable woman in Minnesota reduced to dating one of these two men, neither of whom are remotely good enough for her? She does a good job of selling it, and I believe
it's
she
all
has
her
chemistry
that
with
makes it
John.
work.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course he's attracted to her. Look at her. How old was she when they shot this movie?
Well, that's what I wanted to bring up, and I'm going to be delicate here because I know people get really sensitive about judging women's looks, and I try to acknowledge it's a movie. When we watch movies, you're looking at people's looks, and if they don't like that I do that, oh well, stop listening.
It's relevant in this film, too.
But I asked you this question. I'm going to be nice because I think she's, I just said it, super babe. Ann-Margret, when she was younger, of course, was hotter, but she still looked great in her early 50s. But I'm not that much younger now than she is in this movie.
Oh, my God.
Do I look as old as she does? And she looks great. Again, I think she's hot.
I think if you changed her hair, put her in hipper clothes, she would look our age.
Well, it's also the skin in her hands as well. Maybe that was a hand double. They often get other people to do close-ups of hands and things and insert shots. But when she grabs Lemmon's hand at the end in the hospital bed, I feel like that's her hand, and I don't think my skin looks anywhere near that old. So I'm going to stop judging her because I think she's awesome. And she does save the character. You're right. She's underwritten, as is Darryl Hannah's character. But their charm and their appeal, their physical beauty doesn't hurt either, but their charm and talents make those roles work at all. And that's also how they sell that they're into Lemmon and Pollak, because Kevin Pollak isn't a bad-looking guy, but he's a little shrimp compared to Darryl Hannah, which isn't a reason not to date somebody, granted, but she's about a foot taller than he is, which most women aren't going to settle for. Let's face that fact.
So I buy it because they have a whole lifetime of history, and he's the mayor. That buys you 6 inches? How much taller does it make you when you're the mayor?
He's a boring guy, but Kevin Pollak is very appealing in this movie, too.
Yeah.
He's a very nice guy.
I actually really buy the two of them together. She's coming out of a crummy marriage. There's this guy that she's known her whole life, and she knows is a really nice guy, clearly smart and accomplished. I can see where there's an attraction, especially coming out of a crummy marriage.
And her life is a mess.
That seems like they don't really get into where she met her husband or whatever. The way Christopher McDonald plays it, you could see him being the football star or whatever. He seems very arrogant, and you can see how that would push her into the arms of somebody that she's just attracted to because of his kindness, because he has this great vibe. I bought that more. And when I say I don't buy the romance between John and Ariel, if the script had just paid the slightest attention to what would turn her on, if they just showed John doing one great thing, doing something to impress her, and it's as simple as he does something really nice for Jacob, even though he's fighting with his dad, and she sees it, and then you just play a little hit of music while she looks lovingly at him, like, wow, I see this man's spirit, and it's kind, and I'm attracted to that. But the movie doesn't even give us that. Of course she's dating him. He's the hero of the film. What else do you need to know? Stop overthinking it. Which, in fairness, stop overthinking it. But she is the most embarrassingly cliche example of a manic pixie
She's the
dream.
oldest version of that.
She's so crazy, where that doesn't even make sense. and the irrationality of her attraction to John. And then almost funnier is when John drives her away because he's going to lose his house, and so he just feels inadequate. And then the next scene you see her in, she's with Max.
Yeah.
You didn't have to choose between these two men.
Mm-hmm. She already had the black guy.
I know. She already had Chuck. Well, Chuck took himself out of the running by dying.
True. And I don't think they slept together. Yeah, this movie is antiquated in that way because the two guys are nice people with other people, but they never seem to care about her feelings, what she wants. They don't not care. I shouldn't say that, but they're not that, and the movie isn't that interested in what she actually wants. Let's face it, Matthau is a troll, a little toad.
He looks like a revived corpse in this movie.
Lemmon
His
doesn't look that
skin
bad.
is gray. Like, this man has never had a glass of water.
You see pictures of Lemmon, especially as a young man, and he was fairly handsome. We covered The Odd Couple quite a few months ago. He looked pretty good back then, for sure. And Ann-Margret, I believe, was making movies, I think, in the late 60s. She's so much younger than Lemmon. She's, I think, 16 years younger. But then, that's not that huge a gap, I guess, although Lemmon acknowledges, I'm way too old for you. They don't pretend that he's the same age. Hollywood's done this probably thousands of times by now, where men are maybe 25, 30 years older than the woman, and it's never acknowledged. At least this character does acknowledge it.
And they'll have actresses playing an actor's mother, Angela Lansbury in Manchurian Candidate.
Yeah, she's great in it, but she's barely older than Lawrence Harvey, and she's his mom. But one thing I love about this movie is as much as these two guys don't like each other, Max and John have been feuding since they were little kids, and at the same point, they're obviously best friends. They love each other's kids. They love their own kids. But they really, especially more so John with Jacob, because he sees him quite a few times in the movie. Mel comes over a few times, but really doesn't have that many scenes with Max. But every time John sees him, it's, Jakey!
Yeah.
He's not putting that on. The thing that Max says to John about Mel, he seems like he's not just asking out of politeness. He wouldn't ask John out of politeness. He actually cares about this girl. And they both want them to end up together, too, which is pretty cute. They like Chuck. There's no problem with, well, I guess Max only has one scene with Dad, Grandpa. But he respects him. What does he call him? Mr. Gustafson? Which I guess he would, right? He always did.
Yeah.
So he still does.
He does.
But they like everybody else in the entire story. They just don't like each other. And at the same point, they are truly best friends. And we get that one little reason for it when they have their silly fight out on the ice after Matthau tried to kill Lemmon by pushing him into the...
Destroys his shack.
In water. Yeah, destroys the shack and could have drowned him. We find out that, I don't know if he stole her, but Gustafson won out many years ago by marrying May, who was Max's high school sweetheart. So it could have been Max and May, but instead Max got Amy. And in that same fight, we find out, yeah, Amy was a great wife. We know she's a good cook. That's mentioned as well. And May cheated on John. And did you notice this part? Their two wives' names are anagrams of each other, Amy and May.
Oh, that's so cool.
I've seen this movie several times, never noticed that before till this time.
Well, May must have been the hot one because for Darryl Hannah to be Jack Lemmon's daughter, it's a bit of a stretch. She's just such a beautiful woman.
I think that's the point, is that she was able to be, well, people cheat no matter what they look like, but I think the notion was she thought, I can get anybody. We don't get all this information, but I think that's what it's supposed to be. But when she felt like messing around, well, at least once, she did.
It's better that they leave it at that. We don't need a whole big elaborate backstory. This is the source of their rivalry, but as you say, they still like each other. And as rivalries go, minus the part where Max fully tries to kill him on the ice, it is a pretty decaffeinated rivalry. It's a little toothless. It's kind of a shame in a way that the film focuses on the romance with Ariel, because the real story is with John and Max, just like Oscar and Felix. In The Odd Couple, women can be a part of that movie. They certainly are part of that world, but a far more interesting story is the relationship between these two men and how they come to each other and how they learn to connect with each other, and that kind of relationship is not just important, but a valid thing to root for in a film.
And I don't think we see either wife in that entire movie, The Odd Couple.
Yeah, they talk about them.
But we never actually see either of them.
I would like their reconciliation at the end of the film way more than I want to see a wedding. It's nice, they get married, of course, it's a comedy, everyone's happy that it ends with a wedding. But the true romance in the movie ought to have been more focused on the two of them. The movie chooses to focus on the romance, that's fine. But I just felt like they missed an opportunity there. And the movie doesn't even pretend there's anything remotely dark going on. The pranks are very harmless. Middle school stuff. Oh, I changed his channel. Oh, I made snow fall on his face. Or I put a fish in his car. Up until the point where he really loses his temper at the end. And even that's played for jokes. That he just destroyed his shack. Although truly he could have killed him.
Yes.
You know, and like you said, they're fabulous to each other's kids. It's barely a rivalry. It's very Minnesota, I guess.
Minnesota nice.
It's probably about as mean as people get in Minnesota, right?
Well, Matthau won the Oscar for The Fortune Cookie. We talked about that when we did The Odd Couple, because that was only 2 years before The Odd Couple. Lemmon won his long ago as well, so 1955 for Mr. Roberts, and 1973 for Save the Tiger. So here they are in 1993, all those years later. Especially Lemmon was a bigger star than Matthau, but they're both big names, and they'd made plenty of movies together. They would make a lot more of the rest of the 90s. We'll talk about those in a few minutes. But I think Mathau's greatest moment ever is in this movie. And it almost got me, and it has before. It's when he sees, well, not when he sees that John's had the heart attack, and he finally calls him for the first time ever, John, are you dead? And he calls, help, help, there's an emergency out here, call an ambulance. But it's in the hospital when the nurse asks him, friend or family? He has to think about it. All actors are going to let you see the wheels turning. Friend. He can barely get it out. And I don't think he's teary-eyed then, but when he goes in to see Gustafson all hooked up to all the machines and everything, Merry Christmas, John, his eyes are not quite watery, but they're red.
And from that point, of course, he turns around. The fear of losing his friends just makes him change his ways about everything. He doesn't just scare off the IRS from
Repossessing the house.
Repossessing his house and everything that's in it, but pays his debt.
Yeah, he says it's just a loan, but he and Jacob, between them, Jacob's using his clout. My nutshell was going to be that Mayor oversteps his bounds or abuses his power.
Corruption. It begins here.
Except if I found out about something like this in reality and somebody's father's friend was helped by the mayor and it was only a matter of a few $1,000s of penalties, not the actual what he owed.
And probably
all
just
right, fine.
doing away with red tape. I have way bigger things to be mad about than something like this happening. It's fine.
Well, when Jacob shows up, when they're trying to get into the house and Max has boarded it up, Jacob is just saying, you have a 30-day delay on this. You can't do anything for 30 days. And we find out in the dialogue after the wedding that Jacob took care of the penalties. And then, yeah, so I don't know if Jacob's actually contributing money to anything, but he did that part. And Max is paying for what he owes, but it's only a loan. Okay, let's get into the numbers in the movie. On Rotten Tomatoes, it just squeaks out a fresh tomato by getting 64% positive reviews from the critics. There are 45 reviews on the site, and the average rating is 5.8 out of 10, so the average is actually less than a fresh tomato. The audiences are at 74%, though. As for Grumpier Old Men, the sequel, it gets savaged. It only has 21% positive reviews, although the audiences are much better at 63%. I guess people had grown tired of the Lemmon Matthau extravaganzas by the mid to late 90s because Grumpier Old Men, Out to Sea, and The Odd Couple Part 2 were lambasted on Rotten Tomatoes, although Out to Sea and Odd Couple 2 got better reviews than Grumpier Old Men did. And Grumpier Old Men, I haven't seen it in a while. I might watch it next little while, because why not? Although that's not really a winter movie. We chose this because it's a winter movie. And
it's a Christmas movie.
It is set at Christmas, so yes. But Grumpier's set, I think, during the summer. They're fishing on the lake proper. Spoiler alert on Grumpier Old Men, but people probably know this already. Burgess Meredith is in that one, too, but then they kill him off. And it's a pretty nice scene with him and Jack Lemmon. And Sophia Loren becomes a love interest for Walter Matthau. That's even more absurd.
Oh, yeah, that's
than
pretty
Ann-Margret.
far-fetched.
We've reviewed a lot of movies that came out in 1993, and Grumpy Old Men joins that long list. Jurassic Park, The Fugitive, and Sleepless in Seattle were all in the top 5 of the box office that year. The Grumpy Guys finished 14th, just a few $100,000 shy of Groundhog Day. Everything I just mentioned has been covered by us, as have Schindler's List, Philadelphia, Mrs. Doubtfire, and many others from 1993. The only awards recognition or AFI nomination for The Cantankerous Coots was that it was nominated for AFI's Top 100 Laughs. The movie I covered on Friday, Ball of Fire, made that list, but this didn't. Of course, Lemmon was in AFI's choice for #1 comedy of all time, which was...
Some Like It Hot.
Some Like It Hot, exactly, where he is hilarious. Why would a guy want to marry a guy?
Security!
I'm a guy. Well, nobody's perfect.
Somebody was talking about that movie, and I need to watch it
We
again.
undersold it when we saw it the first time. We did say Lemmon was awesome, as is Marilyn Monroe and as is Tony Curtis, but Lemmon, probably his crowning achievement ever. Okay, that's what other people thought of the Grumps, the critics, the box office, all that stuff. How about Bev? I guess you've said a lot of things already.
Yeah. This is a very safe, predictable Hollywood film. It has about as much edge as an episode of Matlock, which is fine because that's probably the audience they were courting.
Yeah.
Everything it has going for it is thanks to the cast. The entire cast is pretty great. Everyone is giving this pretty pedestrian script more than it deserves and makes it something really charming. I think nostalgia is probably driving whatever affection I have for it, but it does have a really comforting quality about it. If you needed a scientifically perfect example of the late 80s, early 90s G-rated comedy, you could submit this specimen. It's just beat for beat a safe Hollywood comedy.
Matthau didn't have faith in it. He didn't like the script at all, but he signed on anyway because he liked money.
We all like money.
I think they probably paid him pretty well. He was a big gambler, so maybe he had debts or something. He probably was enticed as well to work with Lemmon again. They hadn't for, I don't think, a little while. Well, they're both in JFK, but don't share any scenes together. They made 10 movies together in one way or another, 8 in co-starring roles, because they're both in JFK, and they're both in something else. I forget what it was now. And then also Lemmon directed Matthau and Koch, but I don't think Lemmon's in that at all, so that probably doesn't count. I didn't write them all down. But anyway, 10 movies together, 8 co-starring, and 5 in 5 years in the 90s.
They're putting my kids through college.
Yeah. The stars, the two of them, didn't think this was going to be a hit. And it wasn't a big hit, but it did end up doing all right.
Speaking of money, one of the funnier outtakes in the credit sequence is when Matthau's in the tub, and he says, "If I knew this film was going to have nudity, I would have asked for another million."
Yeah. A good example of a man who really does look like he's in his 70s, which I guess Matthau was, but he didn't take care of himself very well.
He was not a handsome man in his prime either. He was never a good-looking guy.
Were you like me humming, "We're having a heat wave, a tropical
Oh my God,
heat
yes!
wave" for days afterwards?
Yes! What is it about that song? It's been in my head. And much like this movie, which traumatized me because winter is coming, and I hate the snow so much, but here I am living in Canada like a sucker. And watching that movie just made me remember what we're in for, and it's coming. And I seriously did see like a little snowflake in the air today, and the forecast is pretty dismal. Yeah,
we haven't
like,
had snow yet, though, as we record this.
We had like a baby snow. Snow is coming, man, and I'm never ready for it. This movie really puts you there.
The thing
everybody dressed up in their parkas and their scarves up to their chin, and it
well, because they
cold.
shot in Minnesota.
Yeah,
it's set in Wabasha, but they shot in other parts of Minnesota. Wabasha's a real place, so I looked it up. It's about an hour and a half south of Minneapolis. Maybe the interiors were in Hollywood, but that doesn't matter. If you're inside, it's warm anyway. You don't have to look like you're cold.
I think they had to shoot the interiors first because there wasn't enough snow to shoot.
Fargo was the same. A lot of movies have done that. They're supposed to be set in snow, and they got to chase the snow because they just happen to pick a bad time to shoot a snowy movie. And it is December. Of course, we have a Christmas scene towards the end. The wedding seems like it's the very beginning of the spring because there's still snow on the ground, even though they're all just wearing suits and they're not wearing parkas and everything else during that wedding.
You and I both know when spring comes, 4 degrees in March does not feel like 4 degrees in November. And when I say 4 degrees, we're Canadian, so I'm talking about centigrade.
So high 30s for Americans, that's what that would be.
Yeah.
But of course, the running theme of this movie is Gustafson, John, avoiding Buck Henry's character, the IRS guy, Snyder. And he has 30 days to pay up. You see all the overdue bills. It's funny to think that this guy who is a teacher and a smart guy, plays piano, that he would act like he can dodge Snyder to the point where it'll all be fine. It's like Homer. I'll hide under some coats and it'll all work out. He's finally caught when he opens the door thinking it's Max coming over for one more word or something, and then, "Oh, Mr. Gustafson, I finally caught up to you." And then he owes all that money. Buck Henry is a comedy legend, too. He wrote The Graduate. He's acted in plenty of things. We've covered him plenty of times. They're both in The Player, he and Lemmon, by the way. Lemmon actually has that tiny little scene at a piano, and Buck Henry is playing himself, pitching The Graduate 2 in that opening shot in The Player to Tim Robbins.
Graduate 2.
So that was the year after this, right? No, that was the year before this. The Player's 1992. This is 93. And, of course, in this same year, Lemmon made Shortcuts with Altman in a pretty major role as the father of Bruce Davison. The heel role that Lemmon plays in that movie, unusual for him to play that kind of character. And then we see Ariel moving in from across the street. It's Thanksgiving, I guess actually the Thursday. Thanksgiving for the Americans is Thursday. Up here in Canada, we have Thanksgiving on a Monday, and yet we've celebrated on the Monday, the Sunday, the week after, the week before.
It's just a long weekend. You do it when it works out.
Mm-hmm. But Americans take this stuff seriously, so they actually usually celebrate it on Thursday. So it's supposed to be that day. That's why his father's there, to have those great one-liners about what Chuck's going to do with Ariel. Again, pretty presumptuous that he gets to do anything with a woman he hasn't met yet, although he's really gussied up. Chuck's looking his best. Ossie Davis is fun in this movie for a little while. He dies earlier than I remember him dying. It's not long after that scene. But when he talks to the guys the next day at his bait shop, he says it was an awakening. And he isn't playing off that, yeah, we actually did something last night. And I'm not going to judge Ariel if she did sleep with him or if she slept with Max in her time with him.
Well, she said she hadn't slept with anyone since her husband. So if we take her at her word, they did not have sex. Yeah.
That's right. She says that to John. He hasn't slept with anybody since 1978. And she hasn't slept with anybody since the husband died, which is about 5 years ago. Speaking of sex, there's that great moment where Max gets into her place and he sees the statue that's supposed to be of the husband. We don't see it, but apparently it has an enormous penis that she, I guess, carved. And he does seem like he's pretty intimidated. I guess I would be too. It's supposed to be that's what the husband actually had. So yeah, she hasn't had sex in 5 years herself. That's right. So that means that Chuck and Max didn't get anywhere with her going that far, at least, despite what Dad thinks all the time. He is funny, Burgess Meredith's character.
He is,
but because he's old, he gets away with it, but he crosses a lot of lines. What things he says to people.
Whatever. He's a silly old man. It's so much more harmless coming from a man whose son is in his late 60s. That's how old he is.
Right, yeah. Well, he does die. I think it's supposed to be about a year later in the next movie. Yeah.
Did you mount her? Weird turn of phrase.
Well, I look and he takes most of John's beer. John probably shouldn't be drinking beer in the first place. He can't have jerky, is what Chuck tells him, but John takes one of the beers out as if to hand it to his father, and his father takes the other 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, Burgess does steal this movie, doesn't he? He was in, of course, Rocky. Chris and I covered some of the Rocky movies. You and I covered the first one because it was on the AFI's list. But I've talked about Burgess Meredith with Chris so many times now, and he was in...
Batman.
Yeah, back in the 60s. He was the
The
Penguin.
show, yeah.
And he was nominated for 2 Oscars in the 70s, actually, because Rocky was a nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Maybe should have won. And I think it was the year before he was nominated for The Day of the Locust, I believe it's called. And he'd been acting since, well, he's in Of Mice and Men, the 1939 movie.
Yeah, that's right.
So he's been acting
As
at
George.
least that, or had been acting at least that long. He was a pretty old guy. Playing older than he really is in this movie, though.
Yeah, but he's having fun with it. It's great.
Yeah.
We talked about Remains of the Day recently, and I can't remember the name of the actor who plays Hopkins' father. Playing
Peter-
older than he is and doing such a great performance that it would be easy to just forget that's an actor performing feebleness.
I think his name is Peter Vaughn.
Oh, incredible performance. Underrated. Underrated just because he's so natural at it.
Plays like he's old and sick and dying, too. Speaking of dying, Chuck dies in his sleep. And I like how John mutters, "Lucky bastard."
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, even at our age, if you had to go, there's a lot worse ways to go than that. Let's put it that way.
Don't even know what hit you.
But Ariel just insists. What's that line in Family Guy about the Godfather? It's overrated. It
Insists upon
It
itself.
insists upon itself. Ariel insists herself in John's life by coming in the middle of the night to visit him and going in the washroom. He says many times, "No, use the one down here." I don't know what's up in that other bathroom. Probably doesn't take very good care. Although the house is actually very well maintained. Hollywood for you. Unless there's a reason for a house to be disgusting or awful or messy in general, they never are.
No.
Even
no.
a bachelor now, he's not a bachelor, but a man with either a widower or a divorced man, whatever he's supposed to be. He's been living alone for something like 16 years.
In Hollywood, if there are dishes in the sink, it's signs of like a mental breakdown.
Good Will Hunting. We see it when Robin Williams is thinking about what Matt Damon said to him about his painting when he choked him, right? And if you say anything about my wife again, I'll end you. And when we see him in his place later that night, there's a whole mess of dishes there, and he's just sitting in front of a glass of wine. Oh my God, this kid. Oh,
Too distressed to do dishes.
Get that feeling he never does them. But anyway, the romance does start at that point, whether he wants it to or not. In fact, Lemmon was such a charming actor in so many things that we've covered in other movies too. And I wouldn't say he's never charming in this with her, but not really very often.
He's awkward around her. He's pushing her away, or he just...
Even before he actually pushes her away, he pushes her away in the beginning.
Yes. The movie just needed to give me something, anything, to convince me that Ariel would be interested in him. Because it's not like he's funny or smart. Like, he's not... Like,
Oh, he's smart.
He's sure, but she doesn't get to see him being smart. They're both teachers. He was a teacher. She's a professor. So they have that in common. But it's not like we see them bond on that level either. The movie just needs to give me more. But I think the movie's not really about her, is it? She is a glorified MacGuffin to give them something to fight over.
If the movie was made now, or if she was an even bigger name than she was, because Ann-Margret's a pretty decent-sized name, but she didn't have the stroke to say, okay, I like this movie, I want to work with these two guys, it'll be fun, but I have to be pretty much just a pawn of these other people, including Chuck. She lets him in because she's polite, but who the hell are you? At least the two guys across the street are neighbors she's met a little bit. Oh, by the way, I was going to say this earlier when we were talking about the snow and the cold and everything in this film. And it also is true about Rocky Balboa, when Chris and I covered that not long ago. We almost always get a spot in front of the house, but we don't have our own driveway.
It's Toronto. It's 100-year-old
But in Rocky
home,
Balboa, and in this movie, these guys have lived in these houses, especially in this movie, but even in Rocky Balboa, for a long time. And yet, in the opening of Rocky Balboa, you see his truck on the street, not in a driveway, and these two guys are parking on the street. Ariel has a driveway, but they don't.
Or they're just not parking in the driveway?
They don't have driveways. I was looking. They do not.
Oh.
Their houses are much bigger than our house, but it's similar otherwise. They don't actually have a place for a driveway.
I wonder if that's a Minnesota thing, because it really just comes down to, was your house built before most people owned cars? our house was built before most people own cars.
Could be, yeah.
So there was just no assumption that there'd be a need for a driveway or a garage.
And it also allows for people to throw fish in back of people's cars.
Well, yeah, and then like
shovel out. And
when I talk about the trauma of winter, the opening shot where the snowplow comes through and just basically buries their cars, that is so real.
They missed a chance for a joke in that scene, even though when it happens to you, it's never a joke.
Oh, God.
You can't blame anybody, but you get annoyed by it. You're in the middle of shoveling your car out, and that happens, and then you feel like, you just put me under more snow than I just got myself out of.
It's Sisyphean.
They should have had somebody shoveling. Not these guys, but some other neighbor down the street doing that, and then throw the shovel down in anger.
Toronto isn't even the snowiest city. People in Buffalo, I don't know how you live. I don't know
in Minnesota.
Yeah,
I said it
how
before.
do you live?
They get worse weather than we do. Maybe
They're
they don't
further
get...
north than we are.
Well, right, that's true. They're literally further north, but they're also not protected by the lakes like we are.
Yeah.
So maybe Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, and then Quebec and some of those other provinces get worse weather than Minnesotans do, but we're better off than they are, for sure.
Yeah, it's true.
Now, what about the line, getting back to Ariel and John, when they've had their time skidooing and snow angels and a lot of fun? That's when he opens up. He does laugh and smile when he does the snow angels with her. And they have dinner, and then she says, it's time for bed. He thinks she's going to go home. Oh, okay, it was fine. But then locks the door. That, of course, means they're going to go up and have sex. That was a pretty good little bit of writing, actually, I thought. It's time for bed. Lock the door. Right away, you're like him. You realize, wait a minute. Oh, she's not leaving. It's time for bed. Nice.
Then they have the cute conversation about whether or not they should use condoms. Anybody who's younger watching this movie, in 1993, that joke really hit. Because people were obsessed with, rightfully so, people were obsessed with safe sex. And there was a very aggressive public information campaign to convince people to use condoms. So the idea that this man who hasn't had sex in 15 years is like, we need a rubber.
Yeah. Well, I like how he says the kids today are bringing this up all the time. I covered Philadelphia not long ago. The movie might be implying, it isn't a judgy movie, and Jonathan Demme's a very fair director, so I don't think it is implying. But I made that point that, because the defense is making this case during that trial, I guess, that had Tom Hanks' character practiced safe sex and not been so willy-nilly, he wouldn't have gotten AIDS the way he did. The movie implies he got it when he went, although he doesn't really know, I guess, specifically, but when he went to a stag theater, a gay porno theater, without Miguel, his lover, and that's how he got AIDS. So here's a movie that came out, I think around the exact same time as that did, come to think of it, the same couple of weeks or so, maybe a month or so apart. But even though John and Ariel, she's 5 years away from having sex, and he's 15 or 16, whatever it was, obviously she's not going to get pregnant at this point in her life, and it's about STDs. But maybe that was because we were learning from things like Philadelphia. Okay, that movie couldn't have taught this movie anyway.
But you didn't need Philadelphia to know that condoms were...
No, but because back in the 80s when AIDS was first something that people were talking about and more people were actually acknowledging beyond just gay people, it was still thought of as the gay disease. But when you got in the early 90s, one of the reasons why everyone wore the AIDS ribbon at award shows, and I'm sure Lemmon and Matthau and Ann-Margret did when they went to award shows, and Darryl Hannah and Kevin Pollak and everybody else, is because it became very clear, something we always should have known, but we really knew by this point in 1993, anybody can get this. Mm-hmm. So that's why two straight older people that haven't had sex in forever should still at least be somewhat thinking about it.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a deeper moment in this otherwise silly comedy, but highlighted by the fact that locked door. I like that. We mentioned that Jacob won the election for mayor, but in December? Now then again, the year before in Batman Returns, Penguin, we mentioned the Penguin again, the DeVito version, says, elections are in early November. Is this not late December? Because that's a Christmas movie. But then Walken's response is, mayors can be recalled. So that's why there's an election campaign in that, because they recalled the mayor. I don't think there's a recall going on here, but otherwise, why is Jacob getting to be mayor this late in the year?
So what?
It's what we do on this podcast.
A little pedantry.
We mentioned that Mel and Mike are together, of course. We only see Christopher McDonald in that one scene, where he's both a little bit intimidating, the way he just dismisses Kevin Pollak's character. But he's also, I think, intimidated by Jack Lemmon to some degree, and it's suggested that he's a big alcoholic. But they aren't breaking up when he shows up, and that's a bit of a ooh moment for Lemmon's character, but also for us as an audience member, because we're liking Darryl Hannah, Jacob, and Mel. They're actually the last characters in the movie. Mm-hmm. He goes over to her place, and what you got there? Broccoli? Because he'd brought broccoli over instead of mistletoe, and now she's got the broccoli, so...
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah.
And that's the thing, too. They actually have the scene that doesn't really track at the end of this film, where it's the wedding, but they're both in the wedding party. They wouldn't be arriving at the last minute, as everyone else is, you two, get your butts in here, from Grandpa. She would have been with Ariel probably all day as a maid of honor, and he would have been with his dad's best friend for at least some of that time. But both movies, the two grumpy movies, do have a misdirect at the end about what's really going on. This suggests that John died and it's a funeral because they're wearing black as well. And in the sequel, I forget what the misdirect is, but both movies have a misdirect at the end about what's really going on, and it looks like it's going to be something sad. Although, we probably should have realized they're not going to kill off Gustafsson.
It's just the most safe, reassuring film. You talked about the broccoli joke. Great example of a joke that's just so corny. Only pulled off by good actors who are fully committed. But man, on the page, it's pretty dumb.
What do you got there? Broccoli? Holy moly. That's the last line, Kevin
the
Pollak.
holy moly.
That's the last line in Grumpy Old Men.
It has the sensibility of an 80s sitcom. It's just so corny.
I didn't even mention that Donald Petrie directed this. He didn't direct the sequel, but he did direct How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days.
Oh, a movie you love.
One of my least favorite movies of all time.
Yeah, we covered it just to rip on it because it is so bad. At least this movie knows when to finish a scene. It knows when to let a plot line die. How long is this movie?
Like an hour 42, something like that?
Right. That goes so far.
You're
Understanding the economy of storytelling.
But you're missing the far bigger issue here is that in that movie, I didn't want them together. I hated the two of them together.
Take a script that's this dumb and then remove all the charm of all the performers. How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days has some actors that I've really liked in other films. But yeah, in that movie, they're intolerable.
She's worse than he is, but they're both terrible. In this, despite what we've criticized already, I was rooting for John and Errol to end up together. Enough, at least.
Yeah.
The writer was Mark Steven Johnson. This was his debut. He wrote the sequel, although Petrie didn't come back, and he also wrote Jack Frost, another Winterset movie I think might be a Christmas film, but definitely a Winterset movie. So most of the cast in Grumpy Old Men came back for the sequel, but not Ossie Davis because he had died, the character had died. Buck Henry, his character's not necessary anymore because the house is paid off, and then Chris MacDonald is divorced from Mel. Lemmon, I think I mentioned this already, we covered him in Some Like It Hot, The Apartment. We've also covered The China Syndrome, where Lemmon's fantastic in a very dead serious role.
Great movie.
Had that cameo in The Player the year before this, and he and Matthau were in The Odd Couple. We covered that a few months ago. He's in Shortcuts as the bad dad, and then he was also in The Legend of Bagger Vance, a flick that Chris and I covered on Scoring at the Movies. So Lemmon is all over this channel, but Matthau isn't. The only time we've ever covered him was earlier this year in The Odd Couple. And then Chris and I did cover him in Bad News Bears on Scoring at the Movies a year or two ago. Surprising because Matthau was in a lot of movies in his own right, but we didn't cover him that much. And we got all these Lemmon movies, but then Lemmon just happened to be in some great movies. Maybe he's the opposite of someone like Spencer Tracy. Both very talented men, but Lemmon's in a few movies that you could pretty much call great. And I always said, I don't think Spencer Tracy was ever once in a great movie, even though he was great in them a lot of the time. Probably true about Matthau as well. He was a really good actor, but not always in the best movies. He also got pneumonia while making this, apparently, and I think it's from the scene when they were on the lake in that silly fight. He's going to stab... Is it him that's going to stab Lemmon with the fish? The frozen fish? Yeah, because that's when Dad stops the fight. I'm going to pull you two apart again. Break heads, whatever he says. Ann-Margret had 2 Oscar nominations. I didn't write down what the movies were. Oh, Tommy was one of them. Definitely the Who movie Tommy was one. Oh, maybe Carnal Knowledge. She's in the sequel. And she's been covered before by me, but not by you, because she is Cameron Diaz's mother in Any Given Sunday, which Chris and I did on Scoring at the Movies.
Any Given Sunday is the only movie other than Grumpy Old Men and Grumpier Old Men that I've ever seen that she's in.
We should watch Carnal Knowledge then, too.
Yeah. I've never seen Bye Bye Birdie.
She and Nicholson have an epic argument in that movie. If she got the... Let's just see if she got the nomination for that. I think she did. If I'm right about that, and that's the movie she got the other nomination for, it's probably for that one scene alone. Yep. Carnal Knowledge was the other nomination, and then Tommy was 4 years later. Kevin Pollak was in The Usual Suspects. We covered that quite a few years ago, and I covered A Few Good Men last November by myself, one of the first times I ever did a show on my own. Daryl Hannah, I was thinking we covered her in something before, but couldn't remember anything specifically when I was looking her up and thought, it's 3. Can you guess which 3?
Splash.
Yes.
Kill Bill.
Yes. That's the one I forgot. I forgot Kill Bill for sure.
What was it? No, we haven't done Steel Magnolias.
Blade Runner.
Oh, Blade Runner, right.
Where she's pretty great. About 10 years before this movie. Diverse roles there. She's got a pretty dull role in this, but she charms her way through it, and we like her. But Blade Runner, she plays this weird cyborg thing. Splash, she's a mermaid. Kill Bill, she's a badass villain.
To me, she's always Elle Driver.
Elle Driver.
Yeah. I wore that as a Halloween costume.
And no one got it.
No one got it.
No. This is the most standout costume to non-bucks.
The eye patch. And I had a samurai sword. And I was like, I don't get it. What are you? A pirate samurai? I'm like, I hate you.
Gotta carry a sword around all night. I mentioned Burgess Meredith was in all those Rocky movies, so 4 of the first 5, which means I've covered him at least 5 times now in my life, between my 2 podcasts. Ossie Davis, Ruby Dee's husband. So Ruby Dee in Do the Right Thing, because they're both in that. At the end, she's losing her mind, and he's trying to comfort her.
Okay, yeah, I remember.
So they're not married in the movie, but they were married in real life for a long time. And he's also the narrator in Malcolm X. I believe that he gave the real Malcolm X's eulogy.
Oh,
so
wow.
That's how close they must have been. And he's pretty fun in this, from the brief scenes he has as Chuck. Buck Henry wrote The Graduate. He acted in Shortcuts and also To Die For. Who is in that again? Another wintry movie, at least at the end.
Nicole Kidman and Joaquin Phoenix and...
No, who is he in that?
Oh, who is he? I don't remember.
Okay, I wrote it down.
I thought you were like, who's in that movie? I'm like, are you kidding?
Who is he in that?
Who are you? You don't remember everyone in that movie.
And he plays himself in The Player. I just talked about Donald Petrie and Mark Steven Johnson directing and writing. The producers, Richard Berman, worked on the sequel, as did John Davis, and also John Davis did some Predator flicks. I think he was involved in all the Predator films, every spin-off, every sequel, every reboot, all that stuff. The movie's 185-1. We watched our Blu-ray. I bought the 2-pack a long time ago, even though the second one is probably the worst reviewed movie I own down there. It must be one of, anyway. Cinematographer Johnny Jensen also shot Rambling Rose, was an Oscar nominee for Laura Dern and I think Diane Ladd, and a lot of other comedies. The editor, Bonnie, I guess it's Kohler, Koehler. She cut Raising Cain, one of the more underrated De Palma thrillers, and was also a sound editor on the Lucasfilms, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi about 10 years before this. And the composer, the legendary, well, if he's not legendary, he's close to it, Alan Silvestri. So all those movies he did with Zemeckis, so we've covered him lots of times. Back to the Future, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Forrest Gump, Castaway, but also in the MCU. He's, I believe, the composer that did the score for Avengers. So when you think about that moment where they all go back to back when they're fighting Loki's army, that's Silvestri's music. And he did a lot of other things beyond that, but we've covered those. We haven't covered the Avengers, but we've covered those Zemeckis films. What do you think about the look, the cutting, the music? We already mentioned the writing and directing is there.
There's nothing wrong with it, but there's nothing inspired about it either.
When you shoot in the winter on location in Minnesota, it probably isn't easy on the equipment or on the actors. So for the most part, they make it, well, you said, you can feel the coldness.
Yeah, I do kind of appreciate that because I feel like a lot of movies will take place in winter and have people standing outside for hours on end without a hat or mittens on, just doing things that you would never do when it's actually freezing cold temperatures. So it was nice to see it feel real.
What happens next? Well, we know about the sequel, of course. Matthau ends up with Sophia Loren, so he gets an even foxier woman than Lemmon does here. So what happens next in Fantasyland at the end of this movie before Sophia came on the scene? Just my little, because it's always supposed to be just a play, right? What happens next? A play on what really did happen. Isn't it obvious? Three-way!
The first throuple.
You get the bottom, I get the top. Something like that, anyway.
And of course, she has no say in it, just like everything else.
That's true. Yeah, right. It's not her idea.
Yeah.
She'll go with the flow. She really does go with the flow. I think maybe one of the suggestions here, though, too, is that she might have been more uptight 10 years ago or so, or even the 5 years ago when her husband died, and she just changed her attitude a little bit. I get that feeling that she wasn't always like this, at least not this, you know what I mean? She might have been a free spirit, but not this free.
They don't say that, though. The implication is this is just the way she is.
But a key line she has is, you regret the risks you didn't take.
Yeah, that's a nice sentiment, actually.
So I get the feeling that she wasn't taking those risks for all those years of being with her man. Just
or
guessing.
the 5 years since her husband passed away. What would stop her from finding love in 5 years? Because she seems to find love pretty quickly. She moves it, and men are literally lining up at her door, bringing her flowers, trying to court her. So what's been going on for the last 5 years? Maybe that's what she means. The risks that she didn't take, and now she's changing her ways.
And she wasn't a Wabashanian who lived somewhere else nearby because they'd never met her before. She might have been, I forget where she said she came from. Was it a different state, maybe even?
I can't remember.
But she definitely wasn't from this little town. Okay, then last thoughts on Grumpy Old Men, a Christmas movie of sorts. Here's we're in December. Next week won't be a Christmas movie, although, hold on about that a second. But anyway, your last thoughts on Grumpy Old Men.
It has all the things that are good about a Hallmark Christmas movie, but with talent and production values.
I don't see any perfect-looking brunettes in this movie.
The only thing that's missing is a hot guy in flannel.
And a perfect brunette.
And a perfect
Woman.
brunette. And people drinking hot cocoa while taking a walk or whatever.
She can be blonde, but they seem to be brunette almost always, I've noticed, at least in the ads for them.
And they're very popular despite being absolutely terrible. So I say, if you like bad-ish movies, you would love this movie. A good bad movie.
Fair enough, yeah. It was a fun time for us to watch this. It's far from perfect. It isn't the best thing that Lemmon or Matthau ever did together. But it is up there. Odd Couple's better than this for sure. And, okay, JFK, they're both in it, but they didn't make it together. But it's better than the sequel. It's better than The Odd Couple 2. It's better than Out to Sea. And The Fortune Cookie's fine. I'd rather watch this than The Fortune Cookie, actually, to be honest with you. So it's leaps and bounds better than that latter 90s stuff. And Ann-Margret sells very well that she's in love with a man 16 years older than she is, and that she's settled for any of these mediocrities in the first place. All credit to her. Not an Oscar-worthy performance, but the fact that she sells that at all, and even handed to some degree with Pollak, should have got even more kudos than it did.
And if you just want a movie that goes well with Sunday afternoons, getting under a blanket, and not thinking very hard, this is great.
Especially this time of year, yeah. Okay, that was Grumpy Old Men. We'll be back in these chairs in 7 days. We'll get away from Christmas for just one episode, but we'll be talking about an acclaimed film and one with a title that at least reminds us of Jesus. Happy birthday, dear Jesus. It's your month to turn 2023. It's The Miracle Worker, where Anne Bancroft teaches Patty Duke's Helen Keller how to communicate despite being deaf and blind. Oh, we saw it last night, and there is a very brief scene set at Christmas, so Christmas movie, sort of.
We threaded that needle.
It's a very brief scene. It does no bearing on the plot at all. The coming attractions trivia for The Miracle Worker. Apparently, Anne Bancroft said that Arthur Penn, who directed her to a Best Actress Oscar in The Miracle Worker, and this is the guy that did Bonnie and Clyde a couple years after that, was the person who had the greatest impact on her career. What was the next legendary project they did together?
All right, so for the answer to that question, check out next week's podcast about The Miracle Worker. You already know how to find us.
Struggle with that, too.
Miracle Worker. Rural juror. The Miracle Worker. You already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen, which is also where you can find our archive of hundreds of episodes that are available for free. And if you're enjoying us, hey, do us a favor and leave us a rating and a review because you like us and you want us to reach more listeners. We really appreciate it. It's actually a great way to get the podcast out there. We're both on Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis, and Ryan is at MovieFiend51 for now. Twitter is getting more and more bleak every day.
It might really be X pretty soon.
Yeah. Or you can reach us.
An X website.
Yeah. Really will be Threads pretty soon, I think is what's going to happen. Or you can reach us by email, haveyouveurseenpodcast@gmail.com. And you can find our podcast on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount.
I'll lay 10 to 5. I can't get it up before the end of this podcast.
You're on.
Let's go regret the risks we didn't take. Or that we did take, or whatever that serious line she has in this movie is.
And cut.